first, Sam, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. Um, just to give everybody, an idea of why we're doing this. Rise Together started because we all know that Los Angeles is in crisis. Um, it doesn't have to be this way, though. We know that together, Angelinos can create positive, lasting change in the city that we love. A huge part of that, especially right now, is being involved in local elections. So we're hosting this candidate interview series to make the 2020 election, a little bit more accessible for everybody. To be clear, it's not part of our endorsement process or an indication of support or opposition to any candidate. It's just to give you, Sam, a chance to get to know our Rise Together community and to give our community the chance to get to know you. So with that, before we hear a little bit about your background, I would just kind of love to lay the foundation for our conversation. So how does the work of a city councilor, affect our daily lives? What does a city councilor do?
Sure, great question. And it's really nice to be with you and nice to see everyone online tuning in on these important issues. So I think we all focus on the big national issues and state issues, but I think the issues that really affect our lives and affect the lives of all of our neighbors throughout Los Angeles are the ones decided at the city council level. These 15 people that we elect together control a very large budget, over $11 billion. They impact the lives of 4 million Angelinos, and together they have more power, frankly, than the mayor. That's sort of the way that the city is structured. And one way of looking at it is all the departments that the city council controls, or really the departments that affect our lives every single day, whether it's the police, the fire, our parks, our libraries, our streets, housing, sanitation, airport, the port, the list goes on. And obviously on the humanitarian issue of our time, whether or not our unhoused neighbors will have a place to be indoors and get the help that they need so they can be on the path to permanent housing, the city of Los Angeles has control over that big issue, largely on sanitation, housing, and public safety. We don't have that control over the mental health and the public health side. That's the county. So that's really one challenge, and that's something we can certainly talk about.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That is very helpful. It is such a critical role. And it really does affect everything in our lives. So now I'd love to hear about your background and why you want to serve, District 5 in this role.
Yeah. So again, my name is Sam Yebri, and I'm running for Los Angeles City Council because this city that I love, that's enabled me and my family to live the American dream, like you said, is really in a crisis right now. And my parents and I arrived in Los Angeles when I was a year old as refugees from Iran. And I went to local public schools here in the 5th Council District, went off to Yale and USC for law school. 11 years ago, I started my own law firm. And over the years, I've been fighting for tenants and workers and refugees, individuals with disabilities. I've served on numerous nonprofit boards. I've served on city commissions. And meanwhile, my wife and our 4 young kids have watched our city decline. And on every single issue, an explosion of poverty, crime, corruption, and of course, homelessness, and which is a real stain on our city. And it's, I think ultimately why I'm running is because I think City Hall has failed us. And it's time for average people like you and I, and for the Rise Together community and the broader Los Angeles community to fight for the city that we all deserve. And I'm committed to running a very different type of campaign, one that puts communities and families first. So I'm not taking money from real estate developers or PACs or fossil fuel companies or corporate entities or special interests of any kind. I'm focusing on bringing new perspectives and lifting everyone up into the conversation to how to tackle these really important issues, because we're not going to do it alone. Government is a big part of the solution, but we need our friends in the private sector, our nonprofit leaders, to help us bring and devote all of our talent and energy to tackling these big problems.
Absolutely. Oh, it's so good to hear from people who love Los Angeles. I know also, though, it can be really hard to live here, especially it's so expensive. Rent's expensive. It's nearly impossible to buy a house. So I'd love to hear what you could do as a counselor to make the city more affordable and more attainable for the average Angelino.
Yeah, I think even before the pandemic, I think we can all realize Los Angeles is a very affordable, unaffordable place to live, um, especially for working families, and wages have not kept up with the rents in the city. And there's a lot of pieces to that. We just have not been building affordable housing and middle income workforce housing in the city going back decades. And add to that the rent burdens that more and more Angelinos experience. It's shameful that we don't do more to find uh, ways to get people the housing that they deserve. And then now there's this new crisis of tenants potentially being evicted and becoming homeless because the eviction moratorium going away, and not enough support for people who are on the brink. There are hundreds of thousands of people in Los Angeles who are one rent check away, a couple $100 away from potentially being evicted and being homeless. So we have a duty as Angelinos and as city government to do more to prevent homelessness. That is the best use of our tax dollars, is to prevent homelessness on the initial end. And I think to provide services and support, including providing pro bono counsel to tenants who may face unfair eviction, who are low income as well. And then we have to build more affordable housing. Public transportation coming to the west side of Los Angeles, where I hope to represent, is this game changer. There's really an opportunity to build housing near the subway that's coming to Century City and West Village and the VA, and for people to actually work near where they live, can take a bike to where they want to spend their time, and along the way build the bike lanes and the trees and repair the infrastructure. We have one shot to do it, and it's really exciting to potentially be in that role to do that. But it's going to take all of us to come together to demand the type of city that we all want to see.
Absolutely. That is, I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And of course, all of this is kind of contingent on public faith in government, which recently has been shattered. And, this comes kind of on two fronts. One is the obvious string of indictments, and that's really visible. It's a prominent way to see why people are losing faith. But also, there's just years and years of promises and allocating money to issues, specifically around homelessness. And then we as Angelinos just look around and things have just gotten worse. And I think that kind of contributes to the feeling of hopelessness and the lack of trust that the government is even working for us.
Right.
So, what would you do to kind of rebuild that trust?
Yeah. So the first piece is obviously the corruption. We can't ignore it. 3 out of 15 council members face federal indictment for corruption, and I've laid out some ideas to tackle that head on with ethics reform and planning reform and campaign finance reform, and also some big ideas in terms of expanding the city council and redistricting reform as well. But when asked what the biggest issue is facing Los Angeles, I don't talk about homelessness or affordability of housing or public safety issues. Those are all symptoms. It's a lack of accountability. We've allowed, like you referenced, our elected officials to make promises or make excuses or traffic and slogans when people are suffering. Every day, 5 people are unhoused or dying on the streets. And while we're not getting them indoors fast enough, we're not building enough shelters and enough housing, all we're getting is excuses about how our Triple H dollars, we'll eventually have those units, right? So how do we restore trust? We get people in there who are going to actually bring change and come from a different perspective and aren't the same type of elected officials, the same staffers, the same folks in government. And we hold their feet to the fire. If elected, I want you to hold my feet to the fire in terms of what I hope to accomplish. And ultimately, it's about urgency in these issues. We can't wait any longer to get people indoors. We can't wait to find ways to build more affordable housing. We got to cut down on the time and cost it takes to build affordable housing. And then you go down the line in terms of neighborhoods feeling unsafe and not having enough green space. 60% of Angelinos do not have a park within a walking distance. That's shameful. And so we can do a lot better, and we have to.
Awesome. Yeah, that I appreciate that. And as you were talking about, accountability is kind of central to all the issues that we're seeing. And I think that there's specifically in the city council with the immense kind of power around discretionary spending, and the immense power to just kind of be able to spend money that I think kind of alarms a lot of voters when they find out that that there are no like checks and balances around some of this. What would you do to make sure that the city council spending abilities is actually A, transparent, and B, reflecting the priorities of Angelenos and their needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and it's not just discretionary spending, it's discretionary land use decisions. It's how city campaigns are funded. And if it's not illegal in terms of who can donate, it's also things that order the line, right? People
Mhm.
donating to the favorite profit, nonprofits, or hiring people who are related to council members to get land use decisions expedited. So I think we need to overhaul our entire system. I think transparency is a big part of it, right? So our city controller, Ron Galpern's did a good job to try to bring online to the public view how more of our dollars are spent. And I think that's a big aspect of it. And we got to do more. Right now, there is still no single site where folks can see where is that $11.5 billion of our city budget being spent? Where are the millions of dollars for every council member being spent? I think we need to work with hopefully the next controller to make that a priority. I think that's something that all Angelenos want to see and frankly expect. These are our dollars, right? And we got to make sure it's being spent to actually solve problems and improve our neighborhoods.
Mhm. I appreciate that, and especially around the issue of homelessness. I know that this is a big concern for everybody, and specifically the number $50,000 per unhoused person is being spent, and yet somehow we are not feeding people, we're not clothing people, we're not housing people. Um, what can you do as a city councilor to make sure that not just that the money is being spent in a good way, but also that people are being cared for and housed in such a great city that's having this huge issue?
Yeah, I refuse to accept that in the greatest country in the world, in the greatest city in that country, that it's acceptable for people to wither away and die on the streets. These are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are family members. And so my guiding principle, and I think it needs to be our city's guiding principle, is that every night an Angeleno is sleeping on the streets or in a park is a preventable tragedy. 5 people a day are actually dying on the streets who are unhoused. That's not okay. And meanwhile, it's not a question of dollars. We spend $2 billion as a city and a county together. It's a function of how we spend those dollars and what kind of priorities we have. A CEO of a homeless shelter recently shared with me a great analogy that I love, which is it's like treating hypothermia of someone by leaving them in the cold while you try to build a brand new hospital. No, you bring that person inside, you try to warm them up, you cover them with love and blankets. And that's what we have to do with our neighbors who are unhoused. It's not let them suffer in the streets while we try to use that money to build brand new construction and not do it with urgency, not do it with cost-effective and innovative materials and approaches. We have to build shelters. It's everything. We have to build supportive housing, affordable housing, expand prevention efforts, expand Section 8 housing efforts. But the key is to get people indoors as soon as possible. And that's where I think our dollars need to be spent.
Awesome. Thank you. I have one more question. I did want to ask about the current redistricting process. I know that the city council has been criticized for still being involved in what is supposed to be a fully independent process. What would you do as a city councilor to make sure that that process is actually fully independent?
Yeah, look, it feels like politicians are choosing their voters as opposed to voters choosing their politicians when council members appoint commissioners. Council members can fire their commissioners, replace them at will. They can have ex parte communications with those commissioners, basically tell them what to do without having to really fully report. I've watched those commission meetings. They just said, I had a conversation with so-and-so on this date. And then ultimately, whatever those 21 commissioners, some of them are really dedicated, hardworking people. Most of them did months and months of hard work. They came up with a map, and the city council could have thrown it all out and started over again. Ultimately, they made some changes, some significant, some less so. But the whole system just didn't feel like it was democratic and fair and just. And I know there's at least one council member whose district was dramatically changed, which I think is unfair for a lot of voters who voted for that council member. So I've proposed that this needs to be fully independent. And I think we need more council districts as well. With districts being as large as 260, 270,000 people, they're larger than some major cities in this country, the size of Orlando, cities like that. And it's we have to do better to connect communities to their local representatives so that our issues are really heard and resolved.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a good conversation. I know we've covered a lot in just 15 minutes. So I super appreciate you taking the time. I do want to kick it over to you if you have anything else you want to
Yeah, it's a
say.
yeah, it was really a pleasure. My final thought is, I think we all love this city, but for far too long, the people who have been governing it have not reflected the grit and the tenacity and the creativity and integrity of all Angelenos. And I think all of us need to work together to change that. And I think if we come together, we can solve all these problems. These are largely man-made problems, and together we can come up with some really good ideas to solve them. I'm excited to work with all of you. So learn more about me at sam4la.com. Selection is in June, but I'll be here soon. And I'm really honored to have this opportunity. And we're building a really broad coalition of folks who want to make Los Angeles this incredibly safe and healthy and vibrant, equitable city that we all love and deserve.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on again. Thank you also to everybody who was tuning in live. Again, this will be on our Instagram and our YouTube, Rise Together LA. So thank you all and have a great night.
Thanks again. Good night.